I never thought a 100-year-old barn would turn me into a millionaire. But here I am, watching another wedding party celebrate under the same rafters my great-grandfather built with his bare hands. My name is Isaac Foster, and I inherited a 40-acre property in Warren County, Virginia, just outside of Front Royal. The land had been in my family for generations, complete with a modest farmhouse, rolling pastures, and that magnificent old barn that would later become the center of the biggest fight of my life. I moved there permanently in early 2024 after years of working corporate jobs in Richmond that left me feeling hollow and exhausted. The property needed work, sure, but it was mine, and I had plans to restore it slowly while working remotely as a freelance graphic designer. The barn itself was a beauty. Built in 1923 by my great-grandfather, it featured hand-hewn beams, a soaring cathedral ceiling, and those classic red boards that had weathered to a gorgeous rustic patina. It was structurally sound, just cosmetically tired. I spent my first few months there fixing up the main house, mowing the overgrown fields, and generally getting the place back into shape. The barn became my weekend project. I would spend Saturday mornings out there, sweeping out old hay, replacing broken boards, and daydreaming about what I might do with such a magnificent space. The trouble started in June 2024, about 4 months after I had settled in. I was outside the barn one Saturday morning, pressure washing the exterior walls, when a silver Lexus SUV came barreling up my driveway, kicking up dust and gravel. Out stepped a woman in her late 40s with an aggressively styled blonde bob, designer sunglasses, and the kind of expression that suggested she smelled something rotten. "Excuse me," she called out, not even bothering with a greeting. "I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Shenandoah Valley Estates HOA. We need to talk about this eyesore immediately." I turned off the pressure washer and walked over, confused. "I'm sorry, what HOA? This property isn't part of any homeowners association." Patricia's face tightened. "The Shenandoah Valley Estates development is just half a mile down the road, and this dilapidated structure is visible from several of our premium lots. It's bringing down property values for our entire community." I actually laughed. I could not help it. "Madam, this barn was here decades before your development, and my property isn't part of your HOA, so respectfully, it's none of your business." Her expression shifted from annoyed to furious. "We'll see about that. I've already filed complaints with the county about the condition of this building. It's a safety hazard and a blight on our beautiful community." "Your community is half a mile away," I repeated, trying to stay calm. "This is private property that predates your development by almost a century. You have no authority here." Patricia pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the barn from multiple angles. "The county will determine that. I've already spoken to the building inspector. Expect a visit soon." She climbed back into her Lexus and sped off, leaving me standing there with a knot forming in my stomach. I had heard horror stories about HOAs overstepping their bounds, but I never imagined I would become a target when I was not even part of one. True to her word, a county building inspector showed up 3 days later. His name was George, a grizzled guy in his 60s who had been inspecting buildings in Warren County for decades. He walked around the barn with me, checking the foundation, the roof structure, and the general stability of the building. "Everything looks solid," George said, making notes on his clipboard. "Foundation's good, roof is weathered but intact, no structural issues I can see. Someone built this thing to last." "So there's no problem?" I asked, relief washing over me. "Not from a safety standpoint, no, the building is sound." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "But I've got to tell you, Patricia Morrison has been calling the office every day for the past week." She's pushing hard for us to declare this a hazardous structure. Can she do that? I mean, can she just harass the county until they do what she wants? George sighed. She can try, and between you and me, she's got connections. Her husband is a lawyer, and she's friendly with some of the county commissioners. My boss is already getting pressure to find something wrong here. He looked at me seriously. You might want to lawyer up. I've seen Patricia go after people before, and she doesn't quit. That conversation kept me up that night. I had sunk most of my savings into buying out my siblings' shares of the inherited property. I did not have money for a prolonged legal battle with some vindictive HOA president. But I also was not going to let someone bully me off land my family had owned for generations. The next few weeks were tense. Patricia sent me a certified letter demanding I tear down the barn within 30 days. I responded through a lawyer I could barely afford, explaining once again that she had no jurisdiction over my property. She filed a complaint with the county zoning board, claiming the barn violated setback requirements, even though it had been grandfathered in decades before any such requirements existed. I spent hours at the county courthouse, digging through old property records and permits to prove the barn's legitimacy. Then, Patricia got creative. She started showing up at my property with other members of her HOA board, parking at the edge of my land and taking videos of the barn. When I asked them to leave, she claimed they were on the public road and had every right to document neighborhood concerns. She posted on the community Facebook page about the dangerous derelict barn that was threatening property values, complete with unflattering photos that made my restoration project look worse than it was. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Alina Chen, who gave me the idea that changed everything. Alina was 83 years old and had lived in the area her entire life. She had watched Patricia's development go up and had her own run-ins with the HOA when they tried to complain about her chicken coop. You know what would really drive Patricia crazy? Alina said one afternoon as we sat on my porch drinking lemonade, if you turn that barn into something successful, something that brings people and money into the area, she thinks she's protecting property values. Show her what real value looks like. What do you mean? I asked. A wedding venue, Alina said, her eyes twinkling. That barn would be perfect for it. The views here are gorgeous. You've got plenty of space for parking and tents, and every bride I know is looking for that rustic country charm. My granddaughter got married at a place like that out in Loudoun County last year. Cost them $20,000 for one day. The idea hit me like lightning. Alina was right. The barn was absolutely perfect for weddings. The space was huge, around 3,000 square feet of open floor plan with those beautiful exposed beams. The surrounding property had natural beauty that landscaping could enhance, and Virginia's wine country was becoming a massive destination for weddings. Venues were booking up years in advance. I spent the next week researching the wedding venue business obsessively. I looked at other barns that had been converted, studied their pricing structures, read reviews, and crunched numbers. The startup costs would be significant. I would need to do serious renovations to bring the barn up to code for events, including adding bathrooms, upgrading electrical, installing climate control, and creating proper parking areas. But the potential revenue was staggering. If I could book just one wedding a weekend from May through October at an average price of $15,000, that was over $400,000 a year. I used the equity in my property to take out a business loan. It was risky, possibly crazy, but something about Patricia's harassment had ignited a fire in me. I was not just going to save my barn. I was going to make it spectacular. The transformation began in September 2024. I hired a local contractor named Miguel who specialized in historic renovations. Together, we created a plan that would preserve the barn's rustic character while adding modern amenities. We kept the original beams and boards, but cleaned and sealed them. We added floor-to-ceiling windows on the south side to let in natural light and showcase the mountain views. We built a gorgeous bridal suite in what used to be the hayloft, complete with chandeliers and elegant finishes. We constructed a separate building for bathrooms that matched the barn's aesthetic. We installed professional lighting, sound systems, and climate control that was hidden in the structure so it did not ruin the rustic vibe. Patricia noticed the construction immediately. She showed up at least once a week, always with her phone out, recording everything. When the contractors were pouring concrete for the new parking area, she called the county to complain about land disturbance. When we were installing the septic system for the bathrooms, she filed a complaint about potential groundwater contamination. Every step forward seemed to trigger a new attack from her. "What is her problem?" Miguel asked one day after Patricia had spent 20 minutes yelling at us from the road about construction noise. "Does she not have anything better to do? She sees this as her territory," I said. "And she can't stand that someone won't bow down to her." In November, Patricia's harassment escalated. She filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming that my planned business would create excessive traffic, noise, and disruption to the peaceful enjoyment of the Shenandoah Valley Estates development. The lawsuit was absurd on its face. Her development was half a mile away, separated by woods and hills. But it still required me to hire a lawyer and file a response, eating into my already stretched budget. My attorney, Ruth Keller, was a sharp woman in her 50s who had practiced law in Warren County for 25 years. "Patricia Morrison is known for this kind of thing," Ruth told me during our first meeting. She sued 3 other property owners in the past 5 years over various perceived slights. She usually drops the suits when people cave to her demands. "I'm not caving," I said firmly. "Good, because I think we can not only beat this but potentially countersue for harassment." Ruth smiled. "Let's fight back." The legal battle ran parallel to the renovation work throughout the winter. I was hemorrhaging money on legal fees while also pouring everything into the barn conversion. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I had made a catastrophic mistake. But then I would walk into the barn and see the progress, see how beautiful it was becoming, and I knew I was doing the right thing. We finished the major construction in March 2025. The barn was transformed. The original character remained those hand-hewn beams, the rustic wood siding, the sense of history, but now it gleamed with polish and professionalism. The space could comfortably hold 200 guests for a seated dinner. The bridal suite was magazine-worthy. The grounds had been landscaped with gardens, stone pathways, and a ceremony area under a massive oak tree that had shaded my ancestors. I hired a professional photographer to take pictures and launched a website. I created social media accounts showcasing the venue. I reached out to wedding planners in Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. And then I held my breath, hoping someone would actually book this place I had poured my heart and savings into. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks of launching, I had received 35 inquiries. Within a month, I had booked 6 weddings for the 2025 season and had deposits for 12 more in 2026. Apparently, there was a massive demand for elegant barn venues within driving distance of Washington, D.C., and I had created something special. Patricia, predictably, lost her mind. When she found out I was operating a wedding venue, she filed complaints with every agency she could think of. The health department, the fire marshal, the alcohol beverage control board, zoning enforcement. Each time, inspectors came out, looked at my permits and setup and found everything in order. I had done my homework. Every license was current, every regulation followed, every safety measure in place. My first wedding was in early May 2025, and I was terrified something would go wrong. The couple, Jennifer and Mark, were a sweet pair from Alexandria who had fallen in love with the barn's photos online. They arrived on Friday for rehearsal with their wedding planner, families, and wedding party. "Oh my God," Jennifer breathed when she walked into the barn for the first time. "It's even more beautiful in person." That weekend went flawlessly. The weather cooperated, giving us a perfect sunny day. The ceremony under the oak tree was emotional and beautiful. The reception in the barn was magical, with string lights twinkling under the exposed beams and guests dancing until midnight. Jennifer's mother hugged me at the end of the night with tears in her eyes. "You've created something really special here," she said. "Thank you for making my daughter's day perfect." As I watched their car pull away on Sunday morning, I felt something shift inside me. This was not just about beating Patricia anymore. This was about creating joy for people, about preserving a piece of history while building something new. But Patricia was not done. On the Monday after that first wedding, she and 3 other HOA board members showed up at my property uninvited. They walked right past the private property signs I had posted and started taking photos of the barn and grounds. "You can't be here," I said, walking out to confront them. "This is private property and you're trespassing." "We're documenting violations," Patricia said coldly. "Your little venue is operating illegally. I have every permit and license required by the county and state. I've been inspected and approved by every relevant agency." "You're creating a public nuisance," Patricia insisted. "The traffic, the noise, the parking, it's unacceptable." "There's been one wedding," I said, my patience snapping. "One weekend of activity on my private property that I own and have every legal right to use this way. You need to leave now." Patricia stepped closer, her face twisted with anger. "I will shut you down, Isaac. I've already reached out to my contacts at the county. You won't get away with this." "Get off my property," I said firmly. "All of you, now, or I'm calling the sheriff." They left, but I did call the sheriff anyway to document the trespassing. Deputy James Wilson came out, took my statement, and made a note of the incident. "You might want to consider getting cameras set up," he suggested. "If they're harassing you like this, you'll want documentation." I took his advice and installed a security camera system the following week. It turned out to be one of the smartest decisions I made. The wedding bookings kept rolling in. By mid-May, I was booked solid every weekend through October, plus several Fridays and Sundays. I hired staff to help with setup and coordination. I brought in a catering company as a preferred vendor. I was making more money than I had ever dreamed possible. And every single weekend, like clockwork, Patricia found a new way to make my life difficult. She filed noise complaints after every wedding, even though I had a professional sound engineer ensuring we stayed within legal decibel limits and cut music off at 10 p.m. She called the fire marshal claiming I was exceeding capacity limits, leading to unannounced inspections that always found us in compliance. She even tried to get the road leading to my property declared unsafe for the traffic volume, which the county traffic engineer dismissed after a 5-minute visit. The breaking point came in late June. I had a wedding scheduled for Saturday, a big expensive event for a prominent family from McLean. The rehearsal was Friday evening and everything was set up beautifully. That night, after everyone had left and I was doing a final walkthrough before bed, my security camera alert went off. I pulled up the feed on my phone and felt my blood run cold. Patricia and 2 men I did not recognize were on my property, walking toward the barn. It was after 11 p.m. They had no reason or right to be there. I grabbed my phone and called 911 while watching the camera feed. Patricia and her companions entered the barn. I could see them on the interior cameras, walking around, touching things. Then one of the men pulled out what looked like spray paint. "They're vandalizing my property," I told the dispatcher urgently. "I have it on camera right now. Please send someone immediately." I stayed on the line while driving my truck down to the barn, keeping the dispatcher informed. The sheriff's department was only 10 minutes away, but it felt like an eternity. When I arrived at the barn, I stayed in my truck with the doors locked as the dispatcher had instructed, keeping my phone camera recording. Patricia and the two men emerged from the barn looking satisfied with themselves. They saw my truck and froze. Patricia's face went pale. "The police are on their way," I called out through my window. "You might want to stay put." One of the men bolted for their car, but Patricia grabbed his arm. "Don't, that'll make it worse." Two sheriff's cruisers arrived within minutes, lights flashing. Deputies Wilson and another officer named Martinez got out and assessed the situation. I showed them the security camera footage on my phone, clear video of Patricia, and the two men entering my barn, and one of them spray painting obscenities on the newly finished walls. "Patricia Morrison," Deputy Wilson said, recognizing her. "What are you doing here?" "This venue is operating illegally," Patricia said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Someone needs to stop him." "By trespassing and vandalizing property," Deputy Martinez said. "Madam, I need you to put your hands behind your back." I watched in shock as they arrested Patricia and the two men, who turned out to be her husband David Morrison, a lawyer, and her brother-in-law Scott Morrison, a real estate developer. All three were handcuffed and placed in separate cruisers. "We'll need you to come down to the station to give a full statement," Deputy Wilson told me. "And we'll need copies of all your security footage. This is pretty cut and dry, but we want to document everything properly." I walked into the barn after they left and felt sick. They had spray-painted illegal venue and shut down across the beautiful walls I had spent months perfecting. There were obscene words mixed in too. The wedding was in less than 18 hours. I called Miguel at midnight, apologizing profusely for the emergency. To his credit, he showed up at 1 a.m. with his crew and painting supplies. We worked through the night, repainting the damaged sections. By 8 a.m. you could not tell anything had happened. The barn looked perfect again. The wedding went off without a hitch. The bride and groom never knew about the drama from the night before. As I watched them celebrate with their loved ones, I felt both exhausted and vindicated. The legal aftermath was swift and severe for Patricia. She was charged with criminal trespassing, vandalism, and conspiracy. Her husband and brother-in-law faced the same charges. Because the damage was estimated at over $3,000, it qualified as a felony in Virginia. Ruth, my attorney, immediately filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia, her husband, and the HOA itself, seeking damages for harassment, emotional distress, and the cost of defending against her frivolous lawsuits. "We've got her dead to rights," Ruth said with satisfaction. "That security footage is gold." The story hit the local news. HOA president arrested for vandalizing wedding venue ran on multiple stations. The Richmond Times-Dispatch picked it up, then it went regional. Suddenly, everyone was talking about the crazy HOA lady who had harassed a property owner outside her jurisdiction and then vandalized his business. The publicity, ironically, was incredible for my business. My website traffic exploded. I started getting booking inquiries from across the Mid-Atlantic. Couples loved the story of the historic barn that survived both time and a vindictive HOA. My calendar filled up for 2026, 2027, and I was already taking bookings for 2028. Patricia's life, meanwhile, fell apart. The residents of Shenandoah Valley Estates, horrified by her actions and the negative attention she had brought to their community, voted her out as HOA president. The board issued a formal apology to me and dropped all previous complaints. Patricia's husband, as a lawyer, faced potential ethics violations and bar complaints. The criminal charges were serious, and the prosecutor was not inclined to be lenient. In August 2025, Patricia, David, and Scott all pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding trial. They each received probation, community service, and were ordered to pay restitution for the damages. More satisfying to me was the civil settlement. The HOA's insurance company, desperate to avoid a lengthy trial, offered a settlement of $250,000. Patricia and her husband personally had to pay an additional $100,000. That money allowed me to expand the business even further. I added a second ceremony site by the creek on the property. I built a covered pavilion for backup in case of rain. I purchased vintage furniture and decor that elevated the venue's aesthetic. I hired a full-time event coordinator so I could focus on the business side. By the end of 2025, Willow Creek Barn, I had named it after the creek running through the property, had hosted 42 weddings and generated over $800,000 in revenue. After expenses, I had personally made more than $400,000. The barn my great-grandfather had built with his hands had become a thriving business that honored his legacy while creating new memories for hundreds of people. Patricia's harassment had one more unintended consequence. The publicity surrounding the case caught the attention of wedding bloggers, magazines, and influencers. Style Me Pretty featured Willow Creek Barn in a spread. The Knot listed us as one of the top new venues in Virginia. A couple of celebrity weddings from reality TV personalities gave us even more exposure. By early 2026, I was turning away more bookings than I accepted. I raised my prices significantly. Base packages now started at $20,000, and couples still fought for available dates. I brought on more staff, including a full-time operations manager named Wendy Garcia, a former wedding planner who understood the industry inside and out. "You've built something really special," Wendy told me during her first week. "Most venues take 5 to 10 years to reach this level of demand. You've done it in less than 2. I thought about telling her that vindictive harassment was apparently a great marketing strategy, but instead, I just smiled. "We got lucky with timing and location. And you created a beautiful space with impeccable attention to detail," Wendy corrected. "Give yourself credit. The property itself had transformed along with my life. Where there had once been overgrown fields, there were now manicured gardens with stone pathways. The creek had a charming wooden bridge perfect for photos. The parking area was professionally paved and landscaped. The barn gleamed with its restored wood and modern amenities, hidden seamlessly in the historic structure. I had renovated the farmhouse too, turning part of it into a bridal preparation area and small boutique accommodations for wedding parties who wanted to stay on site. In March 2026, I received an unexpected visitor. Alina Chen, my elderly neighbor who had first suggested the wedding venue idea, came by with her granddaughter Lily, the one who had gotten married at a similar venue years before. "Lily's getting married again," Alina announced with a grin. "She's divorced from that first husband, good riddance, and she's marrying a wonderful man this time. They want to book your barn for October." "I'd be honored," I said, hugging them both. Consider it my gift to you, Alina. You changed my life with your suggestion. Alina waved off my offer. Nonsense. You pay your bills like everyone else, but I do want an invitation to the wedding. Obviously, Lily laughed. Grandma wants to show off that she's friends with the famous barn owner. Famous, I said skeptically. Don't you read your own press? Lily pulled out her phone and showed me several articles from wedding publications. You're kind of a big deal in the wedding world now. It was surreal to see my barn, my family's barn, featured in glossy magazines alongside venues that had been operating for decades. But it was also deeply satisfying. I had taken something old and nearly forgotten and given it new life and purpose. The criminal case had closed, but the civil ramifications for Patricia continued. Several homeowners in Shenandoah Valley estates filed their own lawsuits against her for harassment and abuse of power during her time as HOA president. The HOA itself was doing damage control, trying to distance themselves from her actions. I heard through the local grapevine that Patricia and David had put their house on the market and were planning to move out of state, unable to face the community anymore. I did not take pleasure in her downfall exactly, but I could not muster much sympathy either. She had targeted me relentlessly, tried to destroy my livelihood, and ultimately committed crimes in her obsessive quest to force me to bend to her will. The consequences were of her own making. In May 2026, almost exactly 2 years after Patricia had first showed up at my property to complain about my eyesore of a barn, I hosted my 100th wedding at Willow Creek Barn. It was a gorgeous celebration for a couple who had been following the venue's journey on social media since the beginning. They had read about the HOA drama, the renovation process, and the transformation. We wanted to get married here because of your story, the bride, Amanda, told me. You didn't let anyone push you around or tell you what to do with your own land. You built something beautiful out of spite and determination. That's inspiring. As I watched her wedding unfold perfectly under the barn's soaring beams, surrounded by loved ones and joy, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. 2 years ago, I had been a burned-out graphic designer trying to restore an old family property. Now, I was running $1 million business that brought happiness to people and honored my family's legacy. The financial success was almost absurd to contemplate. In the 2025 season alone, I had generated over $800,000 in revenue. With my expanded pricing and bookings solid through 2028, projections for 2026 showed revenue exceeding $1.5 million. After expenses and staff salaries, I was personally clearing over $700,000 a year. That old barn had literally made me a millionaire. But it was not just about the money, though I would be lying if I said that was not incredibly satisfying given how much I had risked. It was about proving that bullies do not always win. It was about taking something people called an eyesore and revealing its beauty. It was about creating a space where people celebrated the most important day of their lives. I expanded my staff to 8 full-time employees and a roster of part-time help for events. We were booking weekday events now, 2 anniversaries, corporate retreats, milestone birthdays. The barn had become more than a wedding venue. It was a destination, a landmark, a success story. Wendy, my operations manager, came to me in June 2026 with an interesting proposal. I've been getting inquiries from other property owners who want to do what you did. Convert old barns into event venues. They want to pay you to consult on their projects. That's not really my expertise, I said. I kind of made it up as I went along. But you did it successfully, Wendy countered. You navigated the permits, the renovations, the business model, the marketing. That knowledge is valuable. We could start a consulting branch of the business. I considered it. The idea of helping other people preserve historic barns while building businesses was appealing. Let me think about it. That summer was our busiest yet. We hosted weddings almost every weekend, sometimes two on a Saturday with one finishing in the afternoon and another starting in the evening. The choreography required was intense, but my staff had it down to a science. The reviews we received were consistently glowing. Couples raved about the beauty of the space, the professionalism of our team, and the overall experience. In August, I received a letter from Patricia's attorney. My first instinct was dread. Was she coming after me again somehow? But the letter was actually an apology. Patricia, through her lawyer, expressed remorse for her actions and the damage she had caused. The letter acknowledged that her behavior had been inappropriate and illegal. It felt formal and lawyer-written, probably required by the terms of her probation, but it was something. I did not respond. There was nothing to say. She had faced consequences for her actions, and I had moved on to building something positive. That was closure enough for me. Ruth, my attorney who had become a friend through all this, invited me to lunch in September. "I wanted to update you on something," she said. "Patricia Morrison filed for bankruptcy last month." I set down my fork. "Seriously?" Between the criminal restitution, the civil settlements, and the legal fees from defending multiple lawsuits, she and her husband are financially devastated. They lost their house. David lost his law practice. It's a complete collapse. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. I had never wanted to destroy anyone's life. I had just wanted to be left alone to do what I wanted with my own property. "That's rough." "You didn't do that to her," Ruth said, reading my expression. "She did it to herself with her choices. You defended yourself, which you had every right to do." "I know," I said. "It's just a lot." "Well, focus on this instead," Ruth said, changing the subject. "I heard you're being featured on HGTV next month." I grinned. "Yeah, they're doing a segment on restored historic venues. They're coming out to film in October." The HGTV segment aired in November 2026 and brought another surge of interest. My website crashed from traffic the day it aired. Booking inquiries flooded in from across the country. I had people offering to fly me out to consult on their barn renovation projects. The business had grown beyond anything I had imagined possible. I hired an accountant to help me manage the finances and plan for taxes. When she showed me the year-end projections for 2026, I had to read them twice to believe the numbers. Revenue would exceed $2 million. My personal income after all expenses would be over $1.2 million. In less than 2 years, I had gone from struggling to pay legal fees to being genuinely wealthy. I reinvested heavily in the property and business. I bought an additional 20 acres adjacent to my land, ensuring I would never have to worry about development encroaching on the venue's pastoral setting. I built a second barn specifically designed for smaller, intimate weddings of 50 people or less, creating a different product offering. I added staff housing so key employees could live on site. I planted an apple orchard that would mature in a few years and add another beautiful element to the property. The local community had embraced Willow Creek Barn as well. The economic impact of having a high-end wedding venue in the area was significant. Hotels in Front Royal were booked solid on wedding weekends. Local restaurants got business from rehearsal dinners and post-wedding brunches. Florists, photographers, caterers, musicians, dozens of local vendors were thriving in part because of the venue's success. The mayor of Front Royal came out to the barn in December 2026 and presented me with a Community Service Award. Isaac Foster has not only preserved an important piece of our agricultural heritage, she said during a small ceremony. He's created jobs, brought tourism dollars to our area, and shown what's possible when someone believes in their vision. Standing there with the award, looking out at the barn that had started all of this, I thought about Patricia Morrison and her first visit. If she had never shown up with her complaints and threats, would I have ever thought to do this? I probably would have restored the barn slowly as a hobby, used it for storage or personal projects. It would have been nice, but nothing like what it had become. Her harassment, her attempts to destroy what I was building, had pushed me to think bigger and bolder. She had tried to tear me down and instead had inadvertently launched me into a success I never would have pursued otherwise. There was irony in that, a kind of poetic justice. I did eventually take Wendy's advice and started a small consulting business on the side. I helped 3 other property owners in Virginia and Maryland navigate the process of converting historic barns into event venues. It was satisfying to share what I had learned and help preserve more of these beautiful old structures. By early 2027, Willow Creek Barn had a waiting list for bookings extending into 2030. I had raised prices to the point where a weekend wedding started at $35,000, and we were still turning away more inquiries than we accepted. The business was stable, profitable, and running smoothly with an excellent team. I finally felt like I could breathe, like I had truly succeeded not just in surviving Patricia's harassment, but in building something lasting and meaningful. The barn my great-grandfather had built with his hands was now securing my financial future and creating joy for thousands of people. That felt like honoring his legacy in the best possible way. One afternoon in March 2027, I was walking through the property doing a routine inspection when I noticed someone standing by the road, looking at the barn. It was a woman around my age, early 30s, with dark hair and a camera around her neck. "Can I help you?" I called out. She startled, then smiled apologetically. "Sorry, I was just admiring your barn. I'm a photographer and I've shot several weddings here. It's such a beautiful space." "Thanks," I said, walking over. "I'm Isaac. I own the place." "Whitney," she said, shaking my hand. "Whitney Grayson. I've wanted to meet you, actually. Your venue is legendary in the wedding industry." We talked for a while about the barn, her photography, the wedding business. She was funny and easy to talk to, and I found myself inviting her to stay for coffee. We sat on the porch of the farmhouse, the same porch where Alina had first suggested the wedding venue idea, and talked for hours. Whitney and I started dating not long after that first meeting. She understood the demands of the wedding industry, having built her own successful photography business. She had actually photographed 2 weddings at my venue before we met. We bonded over our shared experience of building businesses from scratch and our love for preserving beautiful things. By summer 2027, we were talking about the future together. She moved some of her things into the farmhouse. We talked about eventually getting married ourselves, probably in a quiet ceremony away from the barn, since we both spent so much time at weddings professionally. The business continued to thrive. I opened the consulting side more formally, bringing in a business partner who handled most of that work while I focused on Willow Creek Barn. We helped launch 6 new barn venues across the Mid-Atlantic in 2027 alone, each one preserving a piece of agricultural history while creating a viable business. The financial success allowed me to do things I had never imagined. I paid off the business loan entirely. I set up college funds for my nieces and nephews. I donated to local historic preservation societies. I employed 15 people full-time with good wages and benefits. The property that I had nearly lost to harassment had become a source of prosperity not just for me, but for many others. In September 2027, more than 3 years after Patricia Morrison had first pulled into my driveway to complain about my eyesore, I received one more letter from her. This one was handwritten, not typed by a lawyer. She wrote about hitting rock bottom after the bankruptcy, going to therapy, recognizing her controlling and destructive patterns. She acknowledged without excuses that she had tried to ruin me because she could not stand not being in control. She apologized genuinely and said she did not expect forgiveness but wanted me to know she understood the harm she had caused. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I appreciated the apology, but it did not change anything. The past was the past. I had moved forward and built something beautiful from her attempts at destruction. That October, we hosted Lily's wedding at the barn, the granddaughter of Alina, who had started this whole journey with her suggestion. Alina sat in the front row beaming with pride, watching her granddaughter marry a man who clearly adored her. After the ceremony, Alina pulled me aside. "You've done good, Isaac," she said, patting my hand. "Real good. Your great-grandfather would be proud." "I couldn't have done it without your idea," I told her honestly. "My idea was just words," Alina said. "You're the one who had the courage to make it real, especially when someone was trying to stop you. That takes guts." As I watched the reception that night, the barn glowing with light and full of celebration, Whitney beside me photographing the special moments, I reflected on the entire journey. From that first confrontation with Patricia to this moment of success and happiness, it had been a wild ride. I had faced harassment, legal battles, financial risk, and stress that had kept me up countless nights, but I had also discovered strengths I did not know I had. I had built a business from nothing. I had preserved a piece of family history. I had created a space where people celebrated love and commitment. I had proven that bullies and harassment did not have to win. The old barn stood solid and beautiful, just as my great-grandfather had built it, but with new purpose and new life. It had survived a century of weather, the changing economy that had ended most family farms, and a vindictive HOA president trying to destroy it. It had endured, and so had I. Willow Creek Barn went on to become one of the most sought-after wedding venues in the Mid-Atlantic region. By 2028, annual revenue exceeded $3 million. I had achieved what Patricia had tried to prevent. I had created something valuable, something lasting, something that brought joy to thousands of people. And every time I walked through that barn, running my hand along the beams my great-grandfather had hewn by hand, I felt grateful. Grateful for the legacy he had left, grateful for Alina's suggestion, even in a weird way grateful for Patricia's harassment that had pushed me to think bigger than I otherwise might have. The barn had made me a millionaire, yes, but more importantly, it had given me purpose and pride. It had shown me that defending what you believe in, standing up to bullies, and having the courage to take risks could lead to extraordinary outcomes. As Whitney and I locked up the barn after the last wedding of the 2027 season, I looked back at the building one more time. The lights were off, the guests had all gone home, and it was just the two of us in the quiet countryside. The barn stood there in the moonlight, beautiful and solid, ready for whatever came next. "What are you thinking?" Whitney asked, taking my hand. "Just that I'm really glad I didn't tear it down when Patricia first demanded it," I said. Whitney laughed. "That would have been the worst decision ever." "Yeah," I agreed, pulling her close. "It really would have been." We walked back to the farmhouse together, leaving the barn to stand watch over the fields like it had for over a century. Tomorrow there would be more weddings to plan, more couples to meet, more work to do. But tonight, I could rest knowing I had taken something people called worthless and proven them spectacularly wrong. The barn had stood for 100 years before I inherited it. With the preservation work and the new purpose we had given it, it would stand for at least 100 more. And every couple who celebrated their wedding there would become part of its ongoing story. A story that had almost ended with demolition, but instead had transformed into something extraordinary. That was my legacy now, built from old wood and new dreams, from family history and future hopes. Patricia Morrison had tried to write the ending to my story, had tried to force me off my land and destroy my plans. Instead, she had inadvertently become the catalyst for the greatest success of my life. The lights were on in the farmhouse as we approached, warm and welcoming. This was home now, not just mine but potentially ours together. The property that had seemed like a burden when I first inherited it had become the foundation for everything good in my life. I thought about all the couples I had met over the past 3 years, all the love stories that had unfolded in that barn. Each one was unique, each one was special, and I had the privilege of being part of their most important day. That was worth more than all the money, though the money certainly did not hurt. As we settled in for the evening, I checked the booking calendar one more time. Solid through 2030, with inquiries already coming in for 2031. The business I had built out of necessity and spite had become something sustainable and profound. The old barn would continue hosting celebrations, creating memories, and generating prosperity for years to come. And somewhere out there, Patricia Morrison was living with the consequences of her choices while I was living the life she had tried to prevent me from having. I did not waste energy on bitterness or revenge. I simply lived well, built something beautiful, and let that be my response to her attempts at destruction. The barn had saved me just as much as I had saved it. We had rescued each other from obsolescence and neglect, and together we had created something neither of us could have achieved alone. That was the real story, not just about defeating an HOA Karen or making millions, but about preserving what mattered and building a future on the foundation of the past. As I finally drifted off to sleep that night, I smiled thinking about all the weddings scheduled for the coming season, all the joy that would fill that old barn, all the lives that would be touched by the space my great-grandfather had built with his bare hands. He had given me a gift when he constructed that barn a century ago, and I had honored that gift by ensuring it would last another century while creating happiness for thousands of people. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.